So there's this grasshopper, and it was really, really, really thirsty. In fact, it hadn't had anything to drink in about 27 days, which, given the fact that the average mature lifespan of a grasshopper is about 51 days, is a long time. So anyway, this grasshopper happened to find a bar. So it went into the bar and immediately noticed that it was very poorly lit. Part of the fact was because it was a basement bar and there was not a whole lot of natural lighting, but part of the fact was also because a lot of the bulbs had been burnt out. And the grasshopper noticed that the bulbs that had burnt out were of the incandescent type, as opposed to the compact fluorescent or LED bulbs. So the grasshopper made a mental note to itself to tell the proprietor to change them to LED bulbs. Although LED bulbs were more expensive than CF bulbs, they did cast a much more natural hue on individuals, which could be important for the patrons. But anyway, this was something that the grasshopper could mention to the proprietor, the pros and cons of CF versus LED bulbs. The grasshopper continued onwards, noticing a peculiar odor that was a mixture of sweat, urine, stale beer, and vomit. But being very, very thirsty, the grasshopper continued onwards. The grasshopper also noticed a couple of patrons in the bar, some of whom were very well dressed, some of whom were very poorly dressed. In fact, there was a woman whose dress was in tatters, but she had an immaculate pedicure and manicure, and given that the grasshopper was a connoisseur of pedicures and manicures, made a mental note to itself to ask this woman where she got her pedicures and manicures. The grasshopper continued onwards, noticing that there were a choice of stools on which to sit at the bar, some of which were three-legged, some of which were four-legged. The grasshopper decided to sit on a three-legged stool, knowing that a three-legged stool is inherently more stable than a four-legged stool, and in fact it did choose to be the right decision because the stool, in fact, did not rock. Grasshopper looked at the bartender. Bartender looked at the grasshopper. They nodded to one another. The bartender spoke. "Do you know we have a drink named after you?" Grasshopper paused, put an appendage upon what could be considered its chin, gazed off into the distance, looked back at the bartender, and said, "Really? You have a drink named Percy?" So what I did there was just absolutely kill this joke. I basically took a three-line joke. Grasshopper walks into a bar. Bartender says to the grasshopper, "You know if you have a drink named after you." Grasshopper says, "Really? You have a drink named Percy?" And absolutely killed it by adding an insane amount of superfluous details. So much so that you really were confused and lost, and were wondering, how does a pedicure and manicure relate to a grasshopper? Because pedicures and manicures are irrelevant to grasshoppers because grasshoppers have exoskeletons. Or why are you going into the differences between CF and LED bulbs? Why are all these details there listed? Well, it just goes to show that whenever you tell a joke, everything in that joke needs to contribute to the punchline. Just like every time you write a teaching philosophy or tell a story, every detail in that story, every example in that teaching philosophy needs to contribute to the goals.